This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Coveil. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Here's another one of those great examples of what I never expect on this podcast. The commander of a fast attack nuclear submarine in the US Navy. That would be David Marquet, who graduated top of his class at the US Naval Academy, works his way up the chain, gets to that point where he takes command of a sub. Except there was a problem. This particular submarine was not performing. And his leadership at the outset was not performing. He took evasive action. He realized something had to change right now. And one of the key changes that he made involved language. He realized, he learned, leadership is language. You got the wrong language, no one's following you. You can't get across and bring everybody with you to where everyone feels a sense of duty, accomplishment, whatever you want to describe it. There's going to be failure. And David figured out those lessons, the hidden power of what we say, what we don't say. And look, I feel so lucky to get this kind of advice, these kinds of insights from a guy who was in a high pressure, high stress situation. And think about it, how many meters below the surface of the ocean where he's learning all this, he's applying all this, where everything is ratcheted up to a super high degree. I don't know when or if I will ever stop this podcast. Perhaps if I become lazy or boring or something like that. But as of right now, I am insatiably curious. And damn it, am I not lucky to get a chance to speak with, to learn with guys like David Marquet. Let's jump right into this conversation.
Crazy, man. So how do you like it? You must love it.
Yeah, I never expected to be here. I was happily living in San Diego in 2012, and I got onto a speaking tour in Asia. I loved Asia. I didn't want to leave, and was in so many countries and cities. And I was like, where'd I have the most fun in 4 months? And it was Saigon.
Wow. You live in a high-rise apartment?
Yeah.
What's your...
I'm in a high-end, so it's nice. Yeah, it's cool. Right in the heart of the city.
Nice.
Economic development's off the hook. It's crazy.
I'm guessing so.
Yeah.
The traffic is crazy.
Right now, Corona has emptied out Asia pretty much. So.
Is that right? Everyone's staying home?
Well, yeah, and I think be prepared to see it in the States. I think once the suburban moms get nervous and take the kids out of school, the same thing's going to happen.
Yeah. Where do you guys go for like a weekend or a holiday? You have beach and mountains?
Have you been to Southeast Asia?
Singapore a couple times. I've never been to Vietnam. I've been to Malaysia and Thailand, but just sort of touching anytime.
All those places are the kinds of places I pop into. I mean, now we're kind of like nobody wants to fly now. So I suspect the domestic flying market in the States will take a hit soon enough too.
Yeah, well, United just announced they're canceling like 1,000 flights or something.
Hey, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep you for under an hour unless you get on a roll and you can't stop.
That sounds like a long time. I'm not sure I have the energy for that much, but let's try and keep it tight.
Well, it's a pretty typical thing for me, but I got to tell you something in the beginning before we even start. I got to give you a feedback on your book from the beginning, not for broadcast. I was hesitant because of the title and the cover. To me, blended into so many other books that are comparable. However, your content is extremely strong. I know publishers would never want to hear it. I really wonder if I mean, I've done 5 books myself, so I know this whole cover debate, the whole title debate. I just don't think your cover and title it all tell me what's going on inside your book. And what's going on inside your book is a lot.
You know how it is. We had big knockdown, drag out fights about that. And when I started, I wanted to write something was more like a graphic novel. I wanted to have a lot of graphic, maybe not so much a novel, like there was a thread through it, but I wanted all those little interactions to be cartoons where you could see the people talking and little sketchy little things.
Like a storyboard.
Yeah, that's what I pitched. And they said, okay, great. And then as soon as I submitted the first draft and all those little cartoons, like, what are all these? I'm like, that's what I told you I was going to do. I'm like, oh, no, it doesn't seem like a serious business book, blah, 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 blah. Graphic novels are dead. That's what they said. Graphic novels are dead. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. It's not what I see.
Well, I just wanted you to know that as a guy who's seen, I mean, I'm seeing academic books all the time, entrepreneurs, traders, I mean, just everybody under the sun, and your content really struck me as being kind of buried under your cover. Now, I say that in a positive way.
No. Well, I like the fact that the content's strong. I mean, everything builds on the content, but if you have an image that would be better, give me ideas.
I think it looks cute, and it's not cute content. It's very important content.
Yeah. So it doesn't have the gravitas that it really should have.
Yeah, and maybe it's just the bubbles. I don't know. Maybe that was just some designer at Penguin or whatever or Portfolio getting that into their head. But
they had that idea, and I actually liked it. So they can blame me on that. I thought it was good because it could have captured the idea of people talk.
I'm not trying to go off on a tangent either. I just think this is one of these things, especially with your book. It's kind of like, okay, look, I've done this with my book covers. I've gone in at second bites of the apple because my first book's 5 editions. And each time I would kind of tweak the cover or tweak the subtitle. And I didn't care about the past ones. I just kept changing it to whatever felt the best at that moment.
I've never had this conversation on a podcast. It feels like push record and see what happens.
I'm already recording. I mean, I just...
All right, good. I think this might be, this might be the most interesting part of the, hey, listeners, it's a tough dance. You have you're the artist and you have control, but you don't really have control. And it's a tough dance.
It gets to the point where a lot of your direction is somewhat about turning the ship. Let's say you're my superior and I'm underneath you. Am I allowed to tell you, hey, David, I really don't like the cover. I don't like the title. I think what's going on inside those pages, inside that thick book, over about an inch thick, that I actually really liked that stuff. I just felt like, as a guy who's a podcast host, I felt like, God, I didn't really even want to open it up. I just felt kind of like,
Same old, yeah, I know that feeling. It's the same old, all the other shit that's out there. It's just the same old blah, blah, blah.
It's dense, though. You know that. You know where you've gone is very dense. It's not a one-read thing.
So here's the thing, Thinking Fast and Slow, of course.
I've had him on the show.
Was that right?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that is such an amazing book, but it is so dense. And I'm not comparing myself to Kahneman in terms of the psychological chops that guy has and the questions that he asks, but I kind of come at it from a different angle. But I said, that gives me hope that people will appreciate something that has density to it. It's gritty. And so I said, well, hey, I'm just going to pack it in. I don't want to write a 100-page book and fill 250 pages. That's not what I wanted to do.
Can I ask another interesting question at the top, which really has nothing to do with your content? Was your nervousness about podcasts the length because you've been on a lot of bad interviews?
2 things. One is I like the constraint of shorter time because it forces me to be more concise in my answers. The second thing is, what's the second?
You have been on a lot of bad interviews.
Here's the podcasts that don't work. Oh, so you have 6 plays in your book. Now tell us about play 1. Tell us about play 2. I say, no, it doesn't work. That's boring. That's how the book is structured. But let's just have a conversation and talk about how things play out in our lives. What's your experience? That's what I react to sometimes.
Well, let's start there because that's my biggest curiosity. I mean, before I even get into book content, I mean, you don't get a chance to talk to too many folks who've had a chance to command a nuclear sub. Now, you might not think that's that special. You probably know other people that have done the same thing. But to folks that are not there, not living that, it seems pretty damn special Take me back in time, though. So I want to how old were you when you took command?
I was like 38.
Okay, 38.
I was like a baby, man.
And you went to the Naval Academy. So when did you know you were going to the Naval Academy? How old were you?
When I was in high school, like midway through. So first of all, I grew up in the dark days of the Cold War and the 70s. We had crappy clothes, crappy cars. We had inflation.
Hold on, a Chevy Nova was not crappy, was it?
Nah. I was driving a Pinto.
Oh, that's crappy. Gremlins and Pintos were
Gremlin.
crappy.
AMC Pacer, man. My buddy had. Anyway, there was this malaise and this, it's hard to describe it, but there was this everyone walked around with a head hanging low. I was like, we got to do something. We got to win this thing about society being structured where people can either make their choices of their life or they get told what to do, which is how in my head, I conceived of this contest. We got to win that. It's too important. I was on the math team. We call ourselves mathletes. I was in a chess club and that kind of thing. If you're a geek and an introvert and one of those kind of people, what do? Submarines, man. Submarines hide from people. It's perfect. So I was like, I'm going to go be a submarine commander. I didn't really have any of this in my family, but this kind of somehow popped in my head. Oh, I read a lot of history books from World War II, and a submarine force did. This was my vision.
Even as a teen, you had a submarine commander vision as a teen.
Yeah, because it was cool. It was sexy. It was like, if you were a geek, I mean, I guess you could have gone and started Microsoft, but I wasn't thinking along those lines. I was thinking along the lines of, I'm going to go be a submarine commander and win the Cold War.
That's not a bad ambition. I mean, that's a pretty cool ambition in hindsight.
Yeah, and I did it. The submarine commander, and in some small, tiny way, we contributed to winning the Cold War.
Give me some times here. So I know you commanded for a few years.
Yeah.
When did you first get on a sub before you commanded one?
It's just like corporate. Move up the chains. There's 4 levels in the officer ranks. There's 4 tiers in the hierarchy: junior officer, department head, second in command, which we call executive officer, and then commanding officers. And it's 3 years on, typically 2 years off. You're bouncing back and forth. And every time you go back to sea, you go in at the next higher level. You got to pass through gates and you got to be selected, that kind of thing. But if you make those gates when you go back, so you're 3 years as a junior officer, then you go back as a department head, then second in command, and then commanding officer. So I was first on a submarine like 1983. Yeah, 1983.
What is that first experience of going down deep? I mean, this is something that most people don't ever get a chance to feel. My first thought would start to feel like claustrophobia, but would be the first thing that would come to mind. But maybe that's not something that you guys feel as much. Maybe you get used to it. You just don't ponder that, or explain some of those feelings. I mean, there's a lot going on there. Look, we could talk about just this issue for hours.
Okay, so a nuclear submarine is an amazing, amazing, amazing machine. You got this nuclear reactor. It's got a tremendous amount of power if you call upon it. You're out at sea. You drive out on the surface. When you're on the surface, it's kind of loud and the ship's moving back and forth. The waves are rocking you left and right. You can hear a little bit through the hull, the waves splashing. Not a lot, but you can hear a little bit. There's a sense of movement. Once you drive far enough out to sea and the water's deep enough, then you can submerge the ship. And so we pop the vents, is what we call it, and we let the air out of the ballast tanks, and the submarine slowly sinks underneath the water. And I've done a lot of checks to make sure that it's safe to do that. As that happens, you're going through a period of time of maximum instability because the center of gravity and the center of mass are reversing when the submarine's on the surface versus submerged. So this period of instability, and then everything gets quiet. There's no more movement. You don't feel wave movement. Once you get deeper than 100 feet, only the biggest waves would rock the ship. And so there's this sense of just quiet. You don't really have a sense of motion so much. You can hear the fans humming and there's machinery noises, but we deliberately make that stuff super, super quiet. There's a sense of quiet, calm, strength almost. It's like yoga. Every morning I do a little yoga program, and there's sort of this quiet strength. It's cool. I loved it. It was cool.
1.5 billion US dollars each. Is that the right kind of numbers?
Yeah, and now even more. But I mean, they're crazy expensive. The people on board, so there's about 130, 140 people, and they cost $100,000 each just to recruit into the Navy and train. And you're like 20 something years old. The first thing they do is you qualify to be in charge of the reactor plant. And then very quickly later, like within about a year, you're in charge of the front end of the submarine. You stand watch. So for 6 hours, you're basically the captain's representative, and you're standing in the control room. You stand there for 6 hours. You're directing the movements of the ship. You're controlling the maintenance, shutting down different pieces of equipment to do changing the oil filters or whatever it happens to be. Then you get off watch. You're like, holy crap, I was making these decisions. You look around and everyone looks like a baby. We're out there chasing Soviet submarines around the ocean. It's the real deal.
From an engineering perspective, from an operations perspective, you at the point where you've reached commander, you must know almost every nut and bolt of this thing inside and out. I mean, you've got to just, in your mind, is it permanently imprinted there? I mean, could you still summon the imagery of everything on a moment's notice?
I think if you asked me to draw the electric plant and the ventilation system and the trim and drain, I could probably even now get something that's pretty close. So that's the problem, though, is I came up on a group of submarines that were all relatively similar. I developed expertise. And that coupled with my leadership approach, which was leaders tell people what to do. And I get to the Santa Fe, and then at the last minute, they say, no, congratulations, you've been selected to be commander. You're going to go to 12 months of school to learn one ship. And at the very last minute, no, we got a problem. Another ship, the captain quit. By the way, it's the worst ship in the fleet. You'll be fine. And, asterisk, it's a different kind of submarine. It's one of the newest submarines. So it was a submarine I'd never been on before. Was trained, not expected to go there. 2 weeks, and I dropped down. That was like Alice in Wonderland. I'm going down the hatch for the first time. I'm looking around. All the equipment was different, had all these different buttons. It was all digital, latest digital equipment. But I had this overriding sense that captains need to give orders and know all the answers. I kind of pretended to be that way. It all blew up within a very short period of time because I gave an order that couldn't be done. The crew tried to follow it. The officer ordered it. I said, hey, why don't we shift to second gear on this motor? And the motor only had one gear because the Navy was simplifying the equipment. It makes it cheaper and more reliable. Afterwards, when the sailor kind of shrugged and said, well, Captain, there's only one gear on this motor. You guys are idiots. I looked at the officer and said, well, did you know this? And he said, well, yes, I did. I was like, well, why did you order it? Because you told me to. This blew my mind because we do the same thing everyone else does where, but if you don't agree, please speak up. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. What you need to do is stop telling people what to do. That's the only way to get people to speak up.
Stop telling them what to do.
You got to stop telling them what to do. And so I got my team together and I said, because the original plan would be, you're in power, you take initiative, you be proactive. It's like, you guys are all screwed up. Your behavior needs to change.
Were you at your wit's end to some degree? Were you kind of like, you had to get to a point where you had to rewrite the rules in a system of rules that have a lot of constraints already.
Yeah. Two things. Number one, it was fear and panic. I go to these businesses now. They're still in business. No one's dying. No one's shooting at them. They don't have a nuclear reactor strapped to their back. And they want to do culture change. So we got to create a vision for people to move towards. But for me, we were just running away from fear and panic, which was, if I keep giving orders, we're all going to die because the crew's going to follow them.
What was the spark? What was the inspiration to go from an entirely different management perspective?
Yeah, right. It was when I was standing in the control room, I just suggested, hey, why don't we shift to second gear? And the officer ordered it. And then when he said, it wasn't that he made a wrong decision. It's that knowing that there was no second gear, he still ordered it. Look, how many guys at Boeing knew 737 MAX software was a problem? Didn't speak up.
How
many guys at Volkswagen? A lot. How many guys at Volkswagen knew the diesel thing was cheap? How many guys at Wells Fargo were doing fake accounts? Don't give me this holier than thou stuff. If people's reaction is, oh, well, that's just the military. Yeah, you're not in touch with what's going on with humanity. People like to follow orders because it absolves them of the responsibility. I realized the problem wasn't them, it was me. You can only control yourself. Again, this seems so basic when I say it, but how many leaders go out there, they don't control their own behavior. They don't control how they react to bad news, but they want to yell at everyone else and give them a lecture about how they need to speak up. Bring me bad news, and don't just bring me a problem, bring me a solution, which, by the way, is really bad advice. Because what you get when you say that, you hear about fewer problems. You just made it harder for people to bring you problems. The answer is control yourself. Ask questions in a way and interact with your team in a way that makes it easy for them to take initiative, be proactive or whatever. And the way it manifested itself for us was I had to stop giving orders. I would walk in the control room. I would say, Captain, we have a problem here. What do you want us to do? And I'd say, well, that looks tough. What are you going to do about that? Well, we don't know. I was like, well, go talk to some people and call me in 5 minutes. I'll just like do 5 minutes of brain work on this.
Did you have to sit down with all 130 plus sailors and basically say, hey, we're going to go in this new direction? How did you unfold this new thinking?
The submarine force, like most organizations, is tiered. There's white collar and blue collar. We call the white collar people officers and the blue collar people enlisted crews. And they actually wear blue shirts. The officers, we sit together, we eat together, and I had a lot of contact with them. I started with middle management. I started with the senior enlisted guys, which we call the chiefs in the Navy. I got them together and I said, hey guys, I kind of went through this whole thing. I got to stop giving orders. I've got the officers, but now I'm telling the officers, hey, just tell me what you intend to do. Don't ask permission. Just say, hey, Captain, I intend to do this. I intend to submerge the submarine. Here's why. Here's why I'm doing it here. Here's why I'm doing it now. Here's why it's safe to do. Okay, great. But now they're leaning into me. And I said, do you guys want to be in charge of the ship? And they all nodded their head enthusiastically. And I said, are you in charge of the ship? Oh, sure. This was BS. This was cotton candy words that we would just say to each other. Oh, chiefs run the Navy. I said, well, what decisions do you make? Well, we recommend this or we advise on this. I said, that's not a decision. If you're not the final signature at the bottom of the form, if there's a signature below you, you're not the decision maker. How many forms are you the final signature on? None. So I said, we're going to change that. I just started taking some of these Navy forms and I just said, it would go up the chain of command, petty officer, chief petty officer, then the officer, and then second in command, maybe me. And I would just line out the top name. If you were the chief, instead of sending it on to the officers for final approval, there was no more signatures. When you said done, when you said this person's going to go on vacation, when you said we're going to shut down this piece of equipment next Tuesday, it was done. There was nothing below you.
No more passing the buck.
People say, well, I couldn't afford to do that in my organization because people make all these bad decisions and I have to fix all these things. Well, you know why that is? It's because they know there's someone after them. As soon as you say there's no one after you, you know what they do? They go, they check with their buddies, they check with their peers, they ask their boss, because they know they own it. They own that shit. And then they start making these, and you're like, what? These guys are making amazing decisions. How'd that happen? It's because they own it. And so many times we see leaders, I want my team to have ownership. But then 2 minutes ago, I ran down the hallway, stuck my head into Sally's office and said, hey, Sally, give me an update on project ABC. Well, guess what? You just took her ownership. It's your project ABC now. What you need is an organization where Sally runs down the hallway to you and say, hey, Bob, I got a problem with project ABC. Let me give you an update. Here's what we're going to do about it. And here's what I need from you. Shut up and get out of my way.
What's so nice about the direction of your book that I'm holding in your hand, in many ways, what you are promoting, leadership is language, is subtle in a way. It's impactful. It's very big. It's a different way of doing things, but it's language. And language is often very subtle. I mean, you can digest the change of language. I mean, that's what I think is so cool about what you've done is that I can look through and I think, oh, okay, this is just, if I just go this perspective versus my typical perspective, it opens up Pandora's box for collaboration, etc.
The whole thing started with don't say this, say that. For example, instead of saying, don't say, I'd like permission to do this, say, I intend to do this. The problem with empowerment is, let's say you were an engineer, you're the building manager for an office building, but you didn't have a thermometer. I said, I need you to control the temperature in the building. Well, make it a little hotter, make it a little colder. Well, how much hotter, how much colder? You don't have a thermometer. I said, set it to 70 degrees if you have a thermometer. So the problem is, everyone out there is running around saying, I want more empowerment. Well, how much empowerment? Well, a little bit more, not that much, but they don't have a thermometer. So there's no way to measure it. There's no way to affect it. And they think this by saying, be more empowered makes a difference, which of course it doesn't. Be like yelling at the building and saying, warm up a little bit. What we think we're doing is we translate these concepts into language. Collaboration is, what does collaboration look like? What does it sound like? The question you ask your organization is, we abbreviate, we call WISLY. What would it sound like if? So I go to the CEO of XYZ Fortune 100 company, and he says, I want my team to be more collaborative, risk embracing, innovative, whatever. And I said, okay, great. Thank you very much. You just said the same thing. Every other CEO says, oh, no, we're different. That's another story. So, okay, great. Now, what does that sound like? Well, what do you mean? I mean, like if you were running, do you guys have a weekly meeting? Oh, yeah. Well, what does it sound like in the meeting? What would it sound like if the next tier of people below you were more ABC, fill in the blank? Now it gets interesting because one person will say, well, it sounds more like this. Another person will say, it sounds more like that. Well, now we're exposing the cracks in what our vision, our mental model of what does empowerment mean? What does collaboration mean? But the cool thing is once you define what it sounds like, then you also have the answer because all you need to do is practice that and you become the thing. For example, one of our rules was no they on Santa Fe. We had all these theys. Everyone was referring to, oh, those guys are in operations. They ordered the wrong part in supply. They, the officers, screwed this up, whatever. You can only refer to the people as we. What happens is your brain actually changes. The language that you use will change your brain and your synapses grow together. And so when you look at the person in maintenance or you look at the person in supply, they feel like we, but the behavior comes first. So if you start saying the words of empowerment, if you start going to your boss and saying, this is what I intend to do, it might not happen like in the next 10 seconds, but that will become a feeling of empowerment. The phrase is we act our way to new thinking. This is why most change programs don't work. It's because we throw something out. I want everyone to be more empowered and collaborative and reduce these stovepipes. And then we just walk away. We're like shocked when it doesn't actually happen because we're doing it backwards.
Let me take you into an example, a big picture example that near and dear to you, really is a significant part of your new book. And this is this container ship that a few years ago left the Jacksonville, Florida area, headed for Puerto Rico, 2015, I believe, was heading essentially into a hurricane. Let you lay out the scenario, and people are going to have to go read the book because there is a lot of detail here. It's not just a quick story, but we can take people through the basic understanding. But lay out the scenario for how one of these large, what's like almost 1,000 feet long, one of these large container ships getting ready to do a route they've done for a long time with some information coming in on bad weather. Okay, that sounds kind of normal. These guys have seen that kind of stuff all the time. Why don't you lay this scenario out, and then we'll kind of pivot into some things that went wrong.
Here's the deal. So this ship's name is the El Faro. She's been traveling from Jacksonville, Florida to San Juan, Puerto Rico, bring supplies to the island and back for a number of years. It's a straight shot. It takes you on the Atlantic side of the Bahama Islands. But in the second half of the year, every year, the same thing happens. We start getting these big storms. They turn into hurricanes. The hurricane was forming in the Atlantic Ocean. This is not an unusual event. There's a more protected route that takes the ship on the backside of the Bahamas, essentially. So between the Bahamas and Florida, and then between the Bahamas down in Cuba. So it's a protected route, which is called the Old Bahama Channel. So the ship gets underway, and the question is, and we always look at the decisions. Are we thinking about decisions, or are we just driving to the straight path to the San Juan like the way we always did? Basically, the ship took the straight path the way they always did. They knew there was a hurricane. There was no doubt. They were getting the updates. They knew it was hurricane category 1, and it went up to category 3. Then it eventually became the strongest hurricane to hit the Bahamas in 100 years. And they're sailing straight for it. There's a decision point. About halfway down the Bahamas, there's a channel. And at this point, if you've made the wrong decision, you have one last chance to cut through the islands and go to the protected side. And the crew, 2 of the officers, separated by a couple hours, call the captain to say, hey, we're coming up this decision point. We could save ourselves. we could turn right and we could take the protected channel. But the conversations don't sound like this. Now, we know it because the government was able to recover the black box. So we have 25 hours of everything that was said, all the conversations. And the conversations sound like this. Well, it's not looking good right now. I mean, by this point, they've already talked about how hard it is to steer the ship, 790-foot long ship, because the waves are so bashing the ship back and forth. They know they're going into a hurricane, but they're ineffective at saying, Captain, we're coming up to a turn point. I intend to turn the ship right and take us to the protected channel. They don't say that. They don't even say, I recommend. They don't make it clear. And they say, well, I could check on it again. It's vague. It's deferential. You want to say, well, have more confidence, man. Speak up. But wait a minute. Why are they speaking that way? And it turns out it was not just one officer, but two. So they say this is a pattern. So then you go back in time, and it turns out that earlier, the captain's making comments like, oh, we're going to be fine. Oh, I wouldn't have it any other way. Someone says, hey, are we going into the storm? Ah, yeah, you can't deviate for every weather pattern. The captain never calls it a hurricane. At one point, he even says, oh, can't turn for every storm. Oh my God, oh my God. And he kind of has this mocking voice. He's mocking people who would turn to avoid a hurricane. And now, 12 hours later, we wonder why the officers are having such a hard time being those mariners who are recommending turning to avoid a hurricane, because the captains make fun of them. So then we do the next thing. We say, well, the captain's a bad leader. There was a bunch of things which I would have wished he hadn't done. But then we say, well, what's the situation that the captain is in? These guys are all in their 50s. There's one woman officer and the other three are men. They're in their 50s. So you're telling me that this guy was a good leader as he came up through the ranks and then somehow his behaviors changed? I don't think so. The behaviors that we see when the guy's a captain, the behaviors that we see of the CEO of any of these big corporations are exactly the behaviors that the corporation wants, because that's who they promoted. So we can't go say later, oh, it's just the individual. Some bad calls by the CEO of whatever company, Volkswagen. No, the CEO is a manifestation of the kind of image of the person who we thought should run the organization, and that's the person who we keep promoting. It's the organization's culture promotes certain kinds of people, and we reward those behaviors. And those behaviors typically are telling people what to do, being decisive, being a decision maker. They're not a whole lot about listening to other people, not about making it safe for other people to listen. And it's not about raising your hand and saying, hey, I think we have to take the longer route. It's going to cost the company 6 hours of time and another $8,000 worth of gas.
Basically, these cultures that you're describing, the typical corporate cultures, want to pretend that black swans don't exist. If we just keep people on this kind of treadmill mentality, this treadmill leadership thinking, where everything is just always smooth, it seems like it's almost beaten out of people that there can be the 100-year flood or whatever. It's like, look at coronavirus right now. I mean, I still see people that are saying, it's just like the same old flu. Well, maybe it's going to end up being like that, but you can't run the response like that. There's enough evidence that says, hold on, maybe there's something unusual with corona that we don't fully understand, and maybe we should not use the exact same playbook.
I think there's that mental thing. You don't want it to be a pandemic. And so your brain is trying to convince you, oh no, it'll be okay, it'll be whatever. It runs deeper than that in my mind. We've inherited this industrial age structure, which is that there's leaders and followers, that there's white collar and blue collar. And the reason we have that is because we've separated the thinking from the doing. We have one group of people who does what they're told. It started out in the industrial age, it was simple physical manual tasks, working on an assembly line. We go to Facebook or Twitter, the structure is exactly the same as it was in Standard Oil 100 years ago. We have tiers of hierarchy, people, same kind of labels. More importantly, we have this separation of thinking and doing. We have decision-making near the top and execution of the decisions at the bottom. The CEO of Twitter says, my job, so he's getting it right. He's saying, my job isn't to make decisions. This is what the industrial age executives viewed his job as. My job is to build a decision-making factory or build a team that can make decisions. And this, I think, is exactly right. So in other words, we need to let the people doing the work make decisions about the work. This is the most fundamental change that is happening in a workplace.
Trust, right?
It all comes down to that. Yeah. And it's not like, oh, you can do anything you want. No one can do anything they want. Even in the CEO can't do anything he or she wants. Why would you think you can do anything you want? So empowerment isn't you can do anything you want. It means you have the authority. The phrase is push authority to information, not information to authority. Since you have the information in front of you, your hands are in the code. You're cutting on the patient. You're flying the airplane. You're doing the sales talk. You're in the client's office pitching the product. I'm going to push the authority to you versus, no, we're going to channel information up. Here, a perfect example of this is about 10 years ago now. Ginny Rometty has just taken over CEO of IBM. IBM had a bad quarter, and she puts out a memo and says, you salesmen, I really want you to tell us in headquarters quickly if you need any help from us, and we'll respond. I'll make a commitment that we'll respond within 24 hours. This is exactly what it sounds like. Structurally, it's the same deal. Push information into headquarters while people on high will make decisions and push it back out. She's making, we'll do it better, faster, but this is not the right approach. The right approach is to take the authority for making decisions and push it out to the salesman. I don't need to wait. Oh, hey, this is good. Oh, hey, let me go see if I get my boss to sign off on this deal. No, I'm just going to sign it. What? You can? Yeah, I have the authority. I'm going to sign it right here. Like, why not? Once you say it, people are like, oh, yeah, that's what we're doing. But unless they think about it, they're like zombies. They're just following the same playbook that Standard Oil and Henry Ford built.
As you say that, following the standard playbook, let me take you back to the El Faro for just a moment, because obviously there was a bad ending there. The ship went down. You mentioned finding the black box.
You didn't say that.
Yeah, well, you mentioned finding the black boxes. That pretty much hinted as a bad result there. But I think what's so interesting about that example, and perhaps one of the reasons you showed kind of this worst case, is the psychology. Here you have these sailors, these men, all assisting, trying to make the right decisions, or at least they should have been, or they wanted to, but the inability to make the right calls when people knew there should have been better calls to be made in the face of a life or death moment. I mean, guys on the ship, though, you mentioned, well, ladies too, they must have known that the captain was giving poor leadership. They knew they should do something different. Even in a life or death decision, they couldn't so-called push the button to go the other way. It's terribly frightening from a human psychology perspective that we are so wound that way.
Yeah. Yes, they sailed into the hurricane. They sank. Everyone on the ship died. That's the end of the story. It's about 6 hours after that phone call I talked about. Again, people have this sort of denial. Oh, no, that wouldn't happen here in my company. But over and over and over again, Deepwater Horizon, the oil well is on fire. Flames are shooting up 100 feet. There's a button to push that will it has these hydraulic pinchers that would pinch the pipe shut down at the bottom of the ocean. The engineer is not pushing it. And then when he goes to push it, someone stops him and says, you don't have permission. People are already dying. 11 people died. The thing is on fire. There's explosions happening, but he won't push a button. And then someone says, no, I authorize it. And then someone else jumps in and says, no, only the OIM, offshore installation manager. In other words, someone back in Houston can authorize it. And then someone else jumps in and says, no, I'll take responsibility, something like that. Only then does he open the cover on the big red button and punch the button. But by this point, a lot of time has passed. It didn't close. The pipe was bending and twisting. There were some other mechanical problems, and it didn't close the pipe. So as a result, over the next months, millions of gallons of oil flowed through that pipe and contaminated the ocean. But we can go on and on and on. The thing about El Faro that's really interesting is that we have the words that people say, the actual words. I'm guessing if we look at 737 MAX, if we look at any of these other big corporate problems, you're going to see the exact same patterns. What we don't have are transcripts of the decision-making meetings, but you do get little tiny snippets of what it looks like. We see texts from some of the test pilots who are testing the software in the simulator, texting each other saying, oh yeah, I guess I lied to the regulators. I'm feeling so much stress and pressure to move this product forward, but it's really acting weird.
What's really interesting too is on the simulation side for the Boeing 737 MAX, they didn't appear to simulate what could possibly happen to the economics of the company if they went down a shitty direction in terms of decision making. They didn't model that part of like what happens if this actually doesn't work and planes drop and people die. What will happen to the company then? They didn't model that.
Right. Yeah. Again, because we're stuck in an industrial age playbook, and the industrial age playbook is to make a decision up high. So picture Ford, Henry Ford. He decides that we're going to make this Model T, lays out the line, and then we say, start the line. Now, never stop the line because that's lost production and it shows up as waste. And it's a very big red mark on the accounting sheet and it's very visible. We do the same thing now where we say, okay, there's this little momentum. We've got a new thing, 787, same thing. We got a new thing. Airbus is getting ahead of us. They have the Airbus 380. We got to respond. We got to catch up. We have this Potemkin airplane that we roll out, and the same cultural problems there we see manifest again with 737 MAX. I think it goes back to moving the headquarters from Seattle to Chicago because the engineering is in Seattle, so we're just moving it further away from where the engineering happens.
Here's one way that I'm holding your book in my hands right now. As I'm thinking about it, the content is almost like a decoder ring. Like if one understands where you've gone with your content, it's really, okay, you get what's in here, and then you go to whatever operation you're either in or you perhaps want to join or some entrepreneurial venture you want to do. If you are going against the leadership maxims that you lay out, it might all work out for your life. It might be all fine and dandy, but the potential for the variability, the potential for that, quote, black swan to swim in is much, much more ready to happen than if you do take into account some of the wisdom you've put together here.
You can have a good life making decisions, telling people what to do, as long as you're right.
As long as everything works and there's no unexpected.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure you have a good life because at the end of the day, you're going to be looking out and the hospice nurse is going to be there and your family's going to be gathered around. You're going to be like, what did I do? It was all about me. I made decisions. I made money. How great was I? Or are you going to be thinking the people that you're leaving behind are equipped? You've built a decision-making factory that whatever special thing you had, which by the way, probably isn't as special as you think it is, but whatever special thing you had is conveyed to other people and that they can make decisions without you. You're not going to do that in the last week of your life. It's a habit. Every day, when people come to you, you got to move them and invite them. For the people that work for you, your job is to move them into the decision-making space. Why don't you make this call this time? Or if you were to make this call, let's say I wasn't here, you couldn't talk to me, you had to make this call. Take me through your thinking, exposing the thinking, having those conversations, and then equipping people to make those good decisions. And if it strikes you like, wow, this person's really not making a good decision, guess whose fault that is? You. You need to equip them. Is it a technical thing? They haven't gone to school. They don't have the training that you have. Or is it a perspective thing? They don't really understand the risk-gain equations that the company is trying to make. But that's all on you. You can help with that.
And how much more fun was it for you, taking it back to your commanding days, when instead of it being one leader plus 134 guys, as you say, now it becomes 135 leaders? How much more rewarding is that for you? Even though you happen to be the commander, how much more rewarding is it to see the energy and the enthusiasm when people that happen to be below you can feel that they are actually participating and doing something they're leading to. That, from your perspective, that must have really felt nice when you kind of saw that in action.
It happens at 2 time scales. It happens every day when someone comes up to you and the quiet person says, I have an idea about something. Not sure, but let me just lay this out. And you're like, yeah, let's try that. Let's see what happens. You see people and they're building their confidence. And when we go home and we win an award and we say, oh, the team did it, it's not bullshit. It's not, oh, I made a decision to do this and you guys all did what I told you to do. Oh, it's a team thing. That's really just BS. Versus you guys made these decisions. You guys did the thinking part of this and we did it together. But the other time scale is what happens 5, 10, 15 years later. When people call you, email you and say, I'm starting my own company. I've just bought a Subway franchise. I'm the first guy in my family to go to college. I'm whatever it happens. I believe in myself. You believed in me. I didn't even believe in me back then, but you did, and now I do. And look what's happening in my life. And that takes a long time. That may take 10 years.
I do like one, well, there's a lot of things I like, but there's a particular combination of words that you use. You say language is your lever. And that, it's so simple. We've talked about it in this conversation. It's so simple. We've talked about it in this conversation, language as a lever. And once you step back and you really kind of think about what that means and the power to affect change, not only for your own life, but for other people's life. Wow. That's ultimately how I started the conversation off with you, because I just felt like there was so much going on inside here that it was surprising to me, really. I see a lot of interesting takes on improving one's station in life, and you are definitely pretty good at sparking one to self-reflection.
Well, that's high praise, so thank you. But here's the thing. The original books were called codexes. It was coding. Language is the original coding. Everything that you do with other human beings is language. You could say we'd basically just be like cats, dogs, and chimpanzees if it weren't for language. Well, I will say it. The thing that separates humans is our ability to interact and use language and to tell stories, which are stories, so we can change them because we were making them up, to get people to believe in our stories. When you ask a question differently, when you say, someone comes up to you and says, well, I think we got the product launch coming next week. I think we're good to go. And you say, are you sure? You're going to get one response. And if you ask, how sure are you? You're going to get a different response. You can only control your own behavior. So when you ask the question differently, I argue we like, how sure are you? Start the question with how. You're going to get a more nuanced, more thoughtful, more expressive account. Because if you say, are you sure? Is it safe? Will it work? Like, well, it's 99% safe, so I'm just going to say yes. So you just masked a whole bunch of complexity. And then later CEOs say, oh, no one told me.
You really take it in some directions that, as I've said, really, especially for someone like me, and I'm not praising myself, I'm just saying, I see a lot of stuff. I'm always want to improve. You really do a great job of that. You really do a great job. Look, I could keep picking your mind. Maybe one day I'll get you on and we'll just go sub only. I'll get my schematics out and really take you down the path. The book, Leadership is Language, The Hidden Power of What You Say and What You Don't. Very cool stuff. Very cool stuff. Hey, where can we send people, David? Is there a website you've got that you want to direct people to? Or
Yeah, our program's called Intent-Based Leadership. Intent-based leadership, or you can just type in David Marquet and Google will find us. But hey, one thing I would encourage people to check out is our YouTube channel, which is called Leadership Nudges. And these are just little snippets like this thing I just talked about. Don't ask a binary question. Start the question with how. So in other words, don't tell people what not to do. Give them the answer. Start it with the word how. How sure are you? How likely is it to succeed? What's the probability, what or how? What's the probability that assumption will come true? That's going to result in a better question, and you're going to get more information from your team, and you'll have a team which feels more comfortable, safer speaking up. These things are these little 1-minute videos. We're going to come up on number 300 here pretty soon. We go out once a week. And I encourage you to check out Leadership Nudges. It's a channel on YouTube, and then you'll stay tapped into the kind of thing that we talk about. You don't need more training. You just need reminders.
Speaking of reminders, I want to remind the audience that you did attempt to keep this podcast at like 5 minutes long in the beginning because you were afraid that you were going to become bored out of your mind and we're going to have to cut it short. But I actually kept you close to an hour. That must be somewhat positive.
Yeah. So my book is number one in HR, number one in human resource management, which I just think is kind of funny. Like a guy from a submarine has the number one book in HR.
But don't scare people, though. Look, I'm not an HR guy at all. I mean, and I got to tell you, this is an absolute just great business read for anyone that's.
Yeah. I don't want to scare people. Yeah, no, you definitely go out, buy the book. Send me an email, david@turntheshiparound.com. That was the name of my first book, Turn the Ship Around. Let me know how it goes. Let me know what you try. I'd love to hear.
David, thank you for taking the time tonight.
Mike, thanks for having me on your show.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.